Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Corfa and NWRA's webinar series. We're excited to have you today. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We have a really great topic. We're going to be talking about advocacy today. And before we do that, and I turn it over to Libby, our speaker, I'd like to just, again, thank you for coming to our webinar and also recognize the folks from Corfa and the Refuge Association that have joined us. If you don't know me, I'm Sue Wilder, and I'm on the Coalition of Refuges board. And we also today have Joan Patterson, who's our president of Corfa, and Cheryl Hart, who's not only a member of the Corfa board, but also works with the Refuge Association board. I know we have other board members here. I see Ken and also Lisa are here to join us. So we have a few representatives of Corfa, and then we also have some folks that are here from the Refuge Association, and particularly I'd like to acknowledge Eden Taylor, who's our technology specialist in the background, and she helps keep these webinars running smoothly. And we talked about Cheryl and Jeff may be on the call today, as well as Marco, but my screen doesn't show everybody. So if they're here, I thank them for coming as well. I have a couple of announcements before we start with our webinar today on advocacy. The first thing is the next few webinars will be different schedules, and so please pay attention. The upcoming webinars are going to be on, they'll still be on Wednesdays, but they won't be always the third Wednesday. And I'll mention those dates at the end, but they'll be kind of different in the upcoming months. Also, I would like to turn it over to Eden to tell us a little bit about an exciting announcement that the Refuge Association has.
Yeah, so we just wanted to announce that we are extending the Wildlife Refuge Awards nominations process to have the deadline is April 1st. We'll be sending an email out here pretty shortly after the webinar, so just stay tuned for that. But if you haven't gotten your nominations in yet for Refuge Manager, Employee of the Year, Volunteer of the Year, Friends Group of the Year, or Advocate of the Year, please submit them by April 1st. So that's it.
Okay, great. Well, and without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter today, who's Libby Marking from the Refuge Association. We're excited to hear Libby's presentation on the advocacy updates.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Oops. All right, so I am the Director of Government Affairs for the National Wildlife Refuge Association. And so today, the topics we're going to cover is really just going to be a really big government affairs update for what's happening with the budget in particular, what we're looking ahead for fiscal year 2025, a bit of a primer on a coalition that we manage for increasing appropriations, and some other legislative priorities that we have in mind, and of course how Friends can get involved in all of these things. So that's what we'll talk about today. Right off the bat, I wanted to get into what's happening with our budget. So we have the refuge system operations and maintenance budget. Let's see if I can. Operations and maintenance budget. So I want to preface everything that we talk about with the budget by saying, yes, we are disappointed with what's going on with the budget. However, this situation we're in is expected, and I will explain why on the next slide. So I just want to preface that, while yes, we are seeing cuts, it's not a surprise to us, and it's not a surprise to any of the other public land systems that also received cuts. So I just wanted to lay out here in this table to easily see where the budget has gone for the 5 sub-activities for operations and maintenance. So in FY23, we did see an increase, which was awesome. And then FY24, we saw about a 2.7% reduction in appropriations. And the president's fiscal year 2025 budget request just came out a couple weeks ago. And as always, that comes above the enacted levels. However, that request is also a decrease from the president's FY24 request. And that is because of kind of the same reasons why we're seeing a decrease in the enacted levels for FY24. So I'll talk about that in the next slide. But I just want to state that the budget decreases we're seeing are kind of being seen across the board. So it's not just us that's affected. The Department of the Interior budget, which houses, Refuge System, National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, all of those agencies, all of them received a budget cut, and the Department of the Interior budget overall saw a approximately 4% budget decrease. So we actually made out a little bit better than the average, but with the state of the refuge system as it is, it's still not ideal. So why are we seeing these budget cuts this year, both with the enacted levels and that decrease in the budget request? So that is because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was enacted middle of 2023. This basically put spending limits or budget caps in place for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. And the intent is to reduce the national debt. So as I said, that put in place budget caps, which for FY24 effectively kept funding about where it was in FY23. And in FY25, that limit increases by 1%. But the reason we see Congress just really scrambling to pass these multiple individual budget bills now is because of this act. So they're really scrambling to get this all done, and they did get it done. Because if the enacted levels came above those spending caps, then there was going to be an across the board budget slash for every single program. So they were trying to avoid that, which is why we're actually seeing them try to put those individual bills forward now. Yeah, so like I said, that is what the budget climate is. And so that impacted what we were going to see for FY24, and it's going to impact what we see in FY25. So we're kind of adjusting our strategy looking forward for FY25 with this budget situation in mind. And this is what the Biden administration did as well with their budget request. So when asked, why their budget request came in under what they requested last year, they've basically said it's because we want to be realistic about what's possible in this particular budget climate and acknowledge the budget caps that are in place and put something in front of Congress that is much more realistic than what they did last year. So that is why we're seeing these particular cuts. So of course, the refuge system has struggled with funding for many, many years. And even with those slight increases in funding that we've seen, particularly in FY23, those increases in funding haven't kept up with the inflation rates, and it hasn't kept up with the fixed costs, particularly cost of living adjustments, increases in pay. So in FY23, even though they got that budget increase, their actual net increase was only 7.7 million. So the refuge system, well, I should say, so the Biden administration put in place a 5.2% pay raise for federal employees that went into effect in January. And for the refuge system, it costs an additional $3 million in funding to break even for every 1% increase in cost of living. So when you combine that with the 2.7% decrease in funding that they got in FY 2024, their actual funding decreased by about 8%. So much lower than what you actually see on paper. And that is going to have pretty deep effects in how the refuge system is going to be staffed and maintained going forward. So as mentioned, appropriations haven't kept up with inflation. Just wanted to put a graph here to really illustrate what that looks like on paper. So that green section, that's the enacted levels for appropriations. The orange line is the inflation adjusted amount since fiscal year 2010. So currently the 503 million that we saw appropriated for the refuge system in FY 2010 is now worth approximately 765 million. So we're really lagging behind what is needed for the refuge system, just thinking about inflation rates. Now, despite this funding challenge, the refuge system has still seen significant growth since FY 2010. So they've seen 16 new refuge units, they've added hundreds of millions of acres of marine national monuments, they've added new services like the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program, and they've seen an increase of 34% in visitorship since FY 2010. So they're having to do a lot more with significantly less funding every year, and they're having to get really, really creative with how they're leveraging those dollars. And because of those funding decreases, they have been losing staff every year. So since FY11, they've seen a 16% loss in full-time employees, or over 800 positions. And those that decrease in staff and decrease in budget has led to destaffing refuges, has led to closing refuges to the public, consolidating the remaining available staff in refuge complexes. So you have, law enforcement or visitor services people managing, in some cases, multi-state areas. And over half of refuges are not staffed at all. So this situation for the refuge system is completely unsustainable, and the Refuge Association is really focusing on just educating Congress about what the reality is for the refuge system and what we hope to see in funding for the future years. So overall, we estimate that the refuge system needs an annual budget of 2.2 billion at minimum to provide for its basic needs, meet its mandates and public demand, and ensure commensurate staffing compared to similarly sized public land systems. And that budget of 2.2 billion would provide for approximately 7,000 full-time equivalent staff, 90% of which would be field-based. So that's what we're estimating is needed just for actually maintaining and adequately maintaining the health of the refuge system. And so the Refuge Association is supporting the President's FY25 budget request of 602 million, and having that be our ask as an important step towards reaching that 2.2 billion, because it's so far away from where the current budget is. We're wanting to, kind of follow the administration's lead and just be realistic about what is possible for Congress to actually achieve. One of the ways that we're really working on advocating for the refuge system is we have the Cooperative Alliance for Refuge Enhancement, or CARE, and this is a coalition of 24 organizations that the Refuge Association is chair of. So this coalition has been in place since 1995, and it brought together all these different groups for one specific goal, and that is to increase appropriations for the refuge system. So we're very, very active in strategizing together and advocating together to Congress for these funding needs. And I put up here a list of the organizations that we have in CARE. So it's very diverse. We kind of span the range of the political spectrum here. So we have everybody from backcountry hunters and anglers, Ducks Unlimited, all the way to the Wilderness Society and the Nature Conservancy, etc. So it's a really, really fantastic group. And we're very excited for what we have planned for this coming year. One of the things that we worked towards last year, which is exciting for us, is the reestablishment of the Congressional Wildlife Refuge Caucus. And this is a caucus that really is just focused on advancing refuge system priorities through Congress. And it has historically been very bipartisan. And this year, we made it even more bipartisan by adding 3 more co-chairs. So we have the full list here. Traditionally, it has been 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats who co-chair it. And now we have 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats. So it's exciting growth that we're seeing. We'll send this webinar, this slide deck out tomorrow with the recording. And so you'll be able to click on that link there and see the full list of members. But with the reestablishment of this caucus now, we're hoping to engage them a lot more specifically to really make refuge system issues a topic of discussion on the Hill. So we're going to be engaging them a lot more. One of the ways that we did that, we hosted the National Wildlife Refuge Expo on Capitol Hill in November last year. So this was organized and hosted by CARE and supported by the Refuge Caucus, as well as Fish and Wildlife Service, and Corfo also supported us as well. And at that expo, we had 3 of the caucus co-chairs come and speak, as well as Fish and Wildlife Service Director Martha Williams, Refuge Chief Cynthia Martinez, and the Refuge Association President Jeff Haskett. And we had 150 congressional staff attend and come through that event. It was really fun. I think it really educated these staff members about all the values of the refuge system. And this is an annual event. We hadn't held it in a few years, so because of COVID restrictions. So last year was the first time in a while, and we're looking forward to making it even better this coming year. We do have some other legislative priorities aside from appropriations. So here are a few of the main ones, a couple of the main ones. So a big one for this year will be working towards permanently authorizing the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA, as you'll often hear it called. And this is a law that was signed into 2020. It provides $1.9 billion in funding per year for 5 years from energy development on public lands. That's where those funds come from. And that is to maintain infrastructure on public lands. So in 2020, when the law was passed, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was allocated in the language 5% of those funds to address their deferred maintenance backlog. We are hoping to achieve a 15% share of those funds within the reauthorization. So that authorization will be done in 2025. So in 2024, we're going to be up on the Hill talking with offices about increasing that share for Fish and Wildlife Service so they can actually address their deferred maintenance backlog. The other thing that we have an eye on is the Refuge System Protection Act. This is a bill that was reintroduced by Congressman Thompson and Whitman, who are co-chairs of the Refuge Caucus. And this bill grants the authority to the Fish and Wildlife Service to collect damages to repair and restore damages done to wildlife refuges. So, if someone comes in and damages a building or something, they can seek civil damages. So those are a couple of things we're working towards other than appropriations this year. So I wanted to put just a quick summary of all the different things that we're hoping Friends can help with in FY25 when they're chatting with their congressional representatives. So of course, the main thing will be to support increased funding for the refuge system, just really educating, even though we're expecting to have another year where we're disappointed with the budget just due to the budget caps, we still have to put in the work to educate Congress about what the reality is. This is still in a very important time for us to be doing that advocacy and education. Because, in FY25 or FY26, when those caps are expired, we'll have that opportunity again, and we don't want to be behind the ball in making sure Congress knows, okay, well, we need to take care of the refuge system now. So that's the main thing. We just need help educating members of Congress about the funding needs for the refuge system. The second ask is joining the Congressional Wildlife Refuge Caucus. We currently, I think, have somewhere in the realm of 45 members of the House in the caucus, and in the past, it's been well into the hundreds, so we're really hoping to beef that up. And just a note, I didn't mention earlier, but the Refuge Caucus is a House-only caucus. It does not include the Senate. So that is a request just for House members. Third ask is to permanently authorize the Great American Outdoors Act and increase the share of funds for Fish and Wildlife Service from 5% to 15%. And lastly, support the Refuge System Protection Act. So there's a multitude of ways to get involved. The main thing really is just to engage your representatives and make sure that they know who you are, why you're significant. Make sure just that you have a seat at the table with them. That is really the main thing. So a great way to do that is just to invite your members of Congress or their staff to your refuge or any events you're holding. Just get them out there, show them how great your refuges are and everything you're working on, and keep them updated, whether it's new things you're implementing on the refuge, or it's just the impacts that you're seeing from decrease in staff or decrease in funding. Any impacts that you're seeing, make sure you send an update to your congressional offices so they know what's actually going on. And we are hoping that you will advocate to and educate your representatives, not just, chat with them, but actually have meetings with staff or the members if they're back in district, sending letters as a Friends group or as a constituent, outlining, those asks that we talked about in the previous slide. And we do have a couple fact sheets to help you with that. They're linked here. Eden, I think, can also put the links to them right now in the chat, if you don't mind. And those will be sent out tomorrow as well, along with the slide deck. So we have those fact sheets that are detail the situation from a national perspective, but we definitely encourage you to have information for your specific refuge or complex, things like annual visitor levels, how many staff you have, what if you've lost any full-time staff, things like that, just things that are specific for your refuge. And then the Refuge Association is planning a few organized opportunities to help you get involved. So we do send action alerts every now and then when opportunities arise to provide input on whether it's congressional appropriations process or maybe it's regulations, things like that. So just keep an eye out for those action alerts. We try and make it pretty easy just to, click a button, sign your name, and send it on its way. So we try and make those pretty easy to participate in. One of them that's coming up will be to submit public witness testimony to the Congressional Appropriations Committees. That process hasn't been announced yet. I'm keeping an eye out for it, but when that's announced, we will send out an action alert. And the testimony is really simple. It's basically just writing a letter and submitting it. So yes, keep an eye out for that. We will be hosting virtual Hill Days again this year. Last year was the first day we did it. This was just Refuge Association organized virtual Zoom meetings for friends to connect with their congressional offices. And that took place over the course of 4 days. I think last year we did it sometime early summer. So it might be a little bit delayed this year just because the budget situation has also been delayed. So, but yeah, the date will be coming up and we will try to notify friends way in advance so there's time to prep, and we'll do trainings and make sure you have all the information you need and support you through that whole process. But it's fun. I think we had fun last year doing it, so I really hope you engage on that this year. I believe we have Debbie Anderson from Hakalau, Friends of Hakalau, online, who can talk a bit about how her friends group has been doing advocacy.
Okay, hello, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, good, thank you. Yes, thank you. Just for giving me the chance to talk about how our friends of Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge. I'm just the incoming president. The first time for a 2-year term just started with our annual membership meeting, which was in January. And I just wanted to let you know a little about what we do from a legislative point of view. At the beginning of last year and the beginning of 2023, we looked at all our different committees, or we looked at the committees that we had as an organization with our friends group and sort of rearranged some things. And I think we now have 11 really active committees in our friends group. And one of them we added was the legislative committee. And that has been really useful to us because we've been able to come up with talking points to talk to our local politicians, our local elected officers. And we also reached out to our, the Hawaii congressional staff in Washington, D.C., and we visited with them in July of last year. They had never heard from anyone from the Friends group or from anyone from Hakalau Forest, and they were really interested in what we had to say about the issues that are occurring with us, with all our endangered birds, especially up at the refuge. We prepared a PowerPoint. We took some of the graphs that the National Association had put together and made those more on a local level. So we were able to show what the staff spending was versus the maintenance at Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge, and how obviously the staff costs were going up and the maintenance levels were decreasing. So we had set up meetings in advance. We came into DC, and in one day we were lucky enough to set up meetings with all 4 of the different offices with the Hawaii representatives. And everyone was wonderful. They all asked questions. They were all really pleased that we had made the effort to come and see them. They were all very interested in what we had to say. And so we left that meeting, really pleased with the sort of the marketing outreach we had made to them. And then we followed up. We came back in November at the Expo, and that was another chance to meet all our congressional staff that we had met previously in July. And that was fun because as we were driving into DC, I actually was texting all the staff members. I'm like, hey, and we had warned them in advance, but I was sending them text messages. I'm like, we're coming in, we'd love to see you. Can you please come down to the Expo? Here are the hours. And we had, again, representatives from all the different offices coming down to meet us there and to hear the speakers and to meet with the different people who had booths at the Expo. So that was sort of a nice follow-up from that initial visit. And then in October, we had our Walk for the Wild. We had 500 participants in that, volunteers and people who had visited the refuge. So it was a huge turnout, and we invited all our elected county councilmen to that. And I think we had 1 or 2 show up. It wasn't as many as I had hoped, but I think it was a good first step, and we'll do the same thing again this year and perhaps give them some more notice. and we're hoping that we'll get more people up there. But I think it's a good chance for them to be with 500, local residents as well. And then in terms of 2024, we, in terms of sort of legislative issues, we just helped write a press release for a proclamation that we introduced to the mayor, or we got the proclamation from the mayor of Hawaii Island. Our local state Department of Land and Natural Resources had made 2024 the year of the forest birds in Hawaii, which is a great step for us as being part of that community. And the mayors of Maui and Kauai had previously issued proclamations, but the mayor of the Hawaii Island, it was not on his radar at all. So we, one of our board members wrote the proclamation, we took it to him. They had a signing last Monday, and I think there were 14 or 16 different partners who showed up for that proclamation, and we all were able to get some good local press as well. So that was another nice outreach that we had done. So we're also planning another visit mid-year to visit the Hawaii congressional staff, just to give them another update on what we're doing. I feel as though, I was new at this, so I'm learning too what they were interested in. And so we'll go back with another visit and talk about obviously the national concerns and also our local concerns. And then we're also hoping to be at the expo again in November. So just a sort of a quick update on what we're doing with our legislative committee.
Thank you, Debbie. That's all great stuff.
Yeah, we've been busy.
Yeah. So I am happy to take questions now. I know there are already some in chat, so I can address those first.
And Libby, would you like Cheryl and I to alternate asking you questions from the chat?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. First question is from Jonathan at Bosgate. What reductions have there been over time in non-refuge positions? And Jonathan, do you want to unmute yourself and just define what you mean by non-refuge positions?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. I'm obviously aware, because we've got 5 open positions at our refuge, that the burden of cost reduction seems to fall on individual refuges. I spent most of my career in the corporate sector, where that would be the equivalent of Walmart, leaving tills empty in their stores, and these are the frontline staff that interact with customers and so on, which is why a lot of corporations look first at head office. Where's the waste? Where can I take out layers of management? Where can I remove anyone that's got the title deputy, et cetera, because that simply means fat. And I, from what I can tell, and I've had a couple of conversations at regional level with the Fish and Wildlife Service on this topic, it seems that the easy target is the refuge, because you just stop them filling open positions, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you save the money that way. So I just wondered whether there's equivalent shrinkage at the centre, because if there isn't, there certainly should be.
Yeah, I don't have the breakdown of that, and frankly, I don't think Fish and Wildlife Service does either. Whenever we've asked them about kind of that breakdown and how many FTEs they've lost, things like that, they only really just have the aggregate number for the system overall. So I don't have the breakdown. I'm not even sure that Fish and Wildlife Service does either. I imagine.
I bet they do. Don't worry. I mean, they may not be prepared to, publicize it, but they know exactly what the equivalent figure is in Washington and at regional level. So the fact that we don't know it, and the fact that they're not prepared to communicate it, maybe tells us all we need to know.
I'll try, Libby. The next question is from Karen Holter at DC Booth. Is there the possibility of including hatcheries, fisheries in this update to the Great Outdoors Act? As you are aware, hatcheries were not originally included in any of those funds, including deferred maintenance, which is of a concern for hatcheries.
Yeah. Well, before I answer that one more point for Jonathan's last question. I believe you said Cynthia will be doing a webinar with you guys next month, so maybe you can ask her when he's on the, not to, put Cynthia on the spotlight, but that might be a good opportunity to learn. So to answer Karen's question for hatcheries and fisheries, yeah, so I believe that increase in percentage goes to Fish and Wildlife Service broadly, so it's not specific for refuges. So I believe you'll be included in that anyway. However, I'm going to connect with you offline about this because I want to connect you with the kind of the people who are going to be organizing around asking Congress for GOA reauthorization, changing the language up. So I'm just going to reach out to you and see if I can get you connected to those people so you can be at the table for those conversations.
Thanks, Libby. And next question is, if the Great American Outdoors Act deferred maintenance increases from 5% to 15% is successful, how much of the 2.2 billion requirement is offset?
I am so happy that I actually know the answer to this question. So, so the 2.2 billion, the maintenance portion of that 2.2 billion is 621 million. And that could be reduced to 392 million if Congress permanently authorizes GOA and increases the share to 5% to 15%. So I'll put that in the chat just because that's a lot of numbers. So I'll just put that in chat. 691 million. There you go.
There is a question from Jane, but there's a fairly long comment in the chat about some of the things that her group is doing, one of which is a public or a community letter writing day that they're holding at their local library next week. So that may be an idea for other groups.
That's awesome.
From Chloe, this is very helpful. I'm sadly have to jump off. I will watch the rest on the recording. Question, is there a webinar or example of success stories from friends who have successfully brought out members of Congress or their staff to refuges with best practices? Yes, and I can send some links to stories to Eden so they can go out with the recording and the slide deck. But I think it was a few years ago in the quarterly newsletter for Friends, we did have some examples of Friends groups that have invited members of Congress and their staff out to refuges. And also, and I put this in the chat, last year, Corfa and NWA created a recess action kit. So it has the information in there on how to make appointments with your members of Congress, suggested letters for getting them or their staff out to your refuge, and the sort of things that you need to know in order to set up those visits. So that's there.
And I might just add there, Joan, that on that kit, we have a spreadsheet of your congressman tied to each refuge. So if you don't know the congressman's contact information, it's available in the spreadsheet in that toolkit. Is that correct?
It's not in the toolkit, but it's in the same category that advocacy and lobbying on the Coalition of Refuge Friends website. So it's in the resource center.
And we just updated that for 2024. So it's all updated from the last November elections and the changes that have occurred in the past few months.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And thank you for updating it, Sue.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Do you want to open it up for people to read raise their hands if they still have questions. Maybe they don't want to take the time to chat.
That would be fine. Anybody have any questions they have specifically? You can just raise your hand and we can put you on the screen and you can ask your question. Joan, this might be a good time to talk a little bit about the Friends Share.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things we are starting, we've done one pilot program on this so far, is a project called Friends Share. And it's going to be an opportunity for once a month for there to be a Zoom call. It is not a webinar. This is an opportunity for us to break into smaller groups and talk about whatever we want to talk about, whether it be sitting there and even complaining about the lousy budget and the impact that it's having on your friends groups. So what we're looking is we will send out an announcement through Corfa's constant contact list to let you know about when this opportunity is going to be. Typically, we're going to hold it in the evening so that hopefully more people can attend. We have a number of fellow Friends members who are going to act as facilitators. They're not people imparting all this knowledge to you. They're just facilitating the discussion so that everyone is included. We will have some breakout rooms around topics that are really important to all of you. And I thank all of you who submitted your answers to our poll. And then, like I say, we will have some open rooms for friends to be able to talk about whatever they choose to talk about, okay? Any questions about Friends Share? Jonathan?
No, sorry, I prematurely put my hand up. I was going to ask a different question. Apologies.
Oh, please do,
No,
Jonathan. Sure, go ahead.
No problem. We open it up to all questions and comments.
Okay, well, at the risk of blowing the whole thing wide open, I'm a great believer, not in life and in business, of having a plan B. Just in case your plan A doesn't quite pan out as you hope or as you'd like, then you've got some kind of fallback that's may not be an alternative, but maybe something you want to run in parallel. So let's say, for example, that the advocacy that we've been talking about, which is basically continuing to ask the same people to do something different than they've done over the last 10 years, let's assume that isn't 100% successful and that the gap between federal funding and local needs continues to widen, driven by continued shortfalls, driven by climate change and so on and so forth, then what's our plan B? And I wonder whether we ought to be advocating alongside the advocacy that we've already talked about to help reinvent the Fish and Wildlife Service into something that is more fit for purpose, given the likelihood that budget shortfalls are going to be the name of the game for the foreseeable future. So something that's slimmed down and, again, more appropriate for the future, and frankly, something that's more friendly, that recognizes that the only way the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to succeed and be sustainable is as a private federal partnership. And that private partnership can be funds provided by friends, through friends, funds provided by corporations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Rather than heading in the opposite direction, which is kind of the separation of federal and private, as we saw with the stuff from the audit office, over the last 2 years, basically making it more difficult for us to operate as if you like, as a joint venture. So it just seems to me that it would make sense for us to have some kind of fallback and maybe to open those kind of discussions with the Fish and Wildlife Service so we can help them with our expertise and our insights come up with a better model that's going to be more fit for future purpose.
Yeah, I think there's there's a definite acknowledgement that, you know, us just constantly asking for more money hasn't really always been successful. We're definitely not going to get 2.2 billion, you know, anytime soon. So there's 100% that acknowledgement. And so we are thinking of alternative methods or creative methods to achieve funding increases from other vehicles, other sources. So that's, you know, asking for that Great American Outdoors Act funding. That's a big part of it. That'll address a huge chunk of where those funds are going. Same thing with the Refuge System Protection Act. That'll help them out. There's an effort within Congress, at least within, you know, the caucus co-chairs that we've been chatting with, to really think about, well, what else can be done for refuges that isn't just more funding? So those conversations are happening. It's you know, part of it is, well, what new vehicles are, like, big vehicles for public lands are going to come through Congress in the following years, and those are just things we have to be opportunistic about and make sure we're getting in there and advocating for refuges there to make sure they get a piece of the pie. So, you know, there's a lot of pieces to that. As for the other part of your question, which is kind of rethinking and reshaping Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm not sure I'm able to speak on that well, but that would certainly be a much larger and longer conversation, and one that would frankly be pretty difficult, I think, to achieve, as with all things federal government. So, but again, that might be an interesting question for Cynthia in next month's webinar. Oh, and this public-private partnership that you mentioned as well. So there is interest. This is very, very premature, but there has been more talk as I've been up on the Hill talking to more people, up within Department of the Interior, talking to people. There's questions being asked to me all the time. Well, why don't you have a foundation or something like National Park Service? So I just want to state that there's a very growing interest in figuring that out and trying to get a situation where there can be more kind of private dollars going into refuges. So that is very premature, but just letting you know those conversations are getting more and more frequent.
Thanks, Libby. Ken, you've had your hand up for a bit. Do you have a question or?
Thank you. Two things were prompted by one that Joan mentioned and one that Jonathan mentioned. Joan talked about Friends Share, and I wanted to also suggest that the same kind of concept can be operated among Friends groups on a regional basis. When we had the Friends regional gathering in Homer, Alaska in 2019, those of us from Hawaii came back suggesting that we periodically talk story among ourselves for common issues and spreading the word and educating the public of refuge existence in Hawaii. Since then, COVID hit, and that made it difficult to communicate. But Tom Daubert at Kilauea Point and myself have recently decided to re-energize those discussions between our Hawaii refuges. Because of complexing, we're down to 4, so it might be easier to communicate with each other on it. So I suggest to those of you in the Friends groups, if there are a series of friends around your particular area, you may want to have periodic discussions for synergies and common interest issues. Second thing that Jonathan mentioned about restructuring the service and the like, Libby might want to say that she's serving something called CARE, and that might be a place to start that discussion. That's all I had.
Before you jump in there, Libby, I know you're going to make a comment about that, but I just wanted to mention that the idea you have about the alliances at a state level for friends groups, that's actually happening in Louisiana. We have the North Louisiana group and South Louisiana group, which I'm a part of. We're actually communicating and meeting regularly to talk about common issues. And so there's definitely some strength there that you can, a congressman, if he hears from more than one friends group, an alliance at a state level, wow, right? That sends a message. There's just not one person talking and sending a message. It's 4 or 5 different friends groups. So I definitely encourage that. And then Libby, I'll turn it back over to you to answer Ken's other question about the care.
I'm sorry, I think I might need that question repeated. Didn't realize it was a question.
Well, it was not really a question. It was just a comment that maybe CARE has an opportunity to work closely with, as an Alliant member, getting, I lost my thought, but like the foundation kind of follow up for private stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's so premature. I'm before getting everyone involved, I'm kind of just putting feelers out, and we're laying out the traps to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page before we kind of get a whole effort going around it. So and that goes to, so Mary, you put in a question in the chat about, well, what about NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation? Is that not what we're talking about with foundation? So NIFWF isn't really structured the same way or has the same purpose as something like the National Park Foundation. In fact, I think only something like between 3 and 10% of the funds that they put out there actually goes back to refuges. So it's a really small percentage that is actually going back on refuges. They would have to be completely restructured to kind of be a different type of foundation. So yeah, we have one, but it doesn't really serve the same purpose. And it'd probably just be easier to make a separate one. but this conversation is happening with NIFWF too, like that they're posing. I believe Fish and Wildlife Service has approached NIFWF and kind of started talking to them about this whole foundation situation. So yeah.
Libby, that's my understanding, is that they have been approached in how can things be changed to get more money to refuges, but it's preliminary.
And just on the NIFWF thing, I was talking to a corporate donor organization a couple of weeks ago about becoming a donor for the refuge, and they said, "Oh, we don't need to. We already give to NIFWF, and so that should take care of all of our environmental guilt, that we feel. There's our offset right there." And I said, "Yeah, but the as you've already said, there's no direct link back. You throw that money in that pot, and who knows where is it going to go?" Certainly support any discussions with NIFWF to make it a more effective representative of the brand that it has in its name, but with which it has a 1 to 3% connection, which doesn't really seem. Let's change its name if that's not what it's doing.
Okay.
One of the comments that Jonathan made when he kicked off his question a few moments ago, relative to have there been reductions in staff in, for example, the management of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Going back over the last 3 or 4 years, one of the things that FWS attempted to do was streamline some of the administrative functions within their organization. And for example, human resources and legal were supposedly streamlined so that they would facilitate their support processes out to the individual units and regions that they supported. The unfortunate reality is, in any conversation I've had with refuge staff, as I've either traveled around or here at home in Southwest Florida, exactly the opposite has happened. And administrative processes seem to be far more cumbersome than historically they were, and rather than facilitate, are hampering the ability of the corporate FWS structure to give the support needed. That being said, I like your Plan B idea, but I think for it to have any practical chance of working, we'd have to define what at least a skeletal structure of Plan B might look like. Going in and simply saying to those guys, hey, you've created a corporate infrastructure here which impedes rather than facilitates the ability of the organization to deliver what they're supposed to deliver, probably ain't going to get us beyond square zero. But if we had some thoughts on how it might be done, that might at least open the door to some dialogue. Whichever way you hack it, though, I think it's going to be a very difficult discussion.
Well, thank you, Mike. Just to say, I don't think there are any easy discussions left.
No, you're right.
That's right.
So, you know, by definition, anything that's going to fix the problem we've got is going to be difficult because all the easy stuff's been done.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions in the chat? Joan, Libby, Cheryl?
So I don't see any other questions in the chat, but there's one idea that's come up from some of the folks that have been getting together through Corfa to talk about advocacy. And perhaps it's more like a Plan C or a Plan D. But one of the things is that, you know, yeah, this is an election year. What can we do to get out the vote, to get friends groups out there voting, to get individuals out there voting and thinking about, in terms of their vote, how does it help support hatcheries and refuges? You know, without breaking any rules. We're not talking about, you know, you should vote for this particular candidate, but just, hey, if you care about the environment, get out and vote and hopefully think about who's going to be the best candidate. Because maybe we need to change who's on Capitol Hill in order to further the mission of the refuge system. And I'd just like to get an idea of what people think of that. Is that something that we should be pursuing? Or it's just pie in the sky? I see a thumbs up from Jonathan. So I'd love to hear what you all think.
Looks like there's a comment in the chat about it.
I see Polly saying you should go to candidate forums and ask them in public whether they support refuges. Great idea, Polly. Yep.
Certainly food for thought.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. Libby, are you good? We'll try to tie things up here then. And again, I do want to thank everybody for coming today, and thanks especially Libby for a great presentation. We certainly have a lot of good thoughts and ideas that we can take back to our boards and have conversations with our friends groups, and many friends groups around us. So hopefully we'll continue to use the facts and figures and information that Libby's provided today to kind of help us strengthen our advocacy efforts. And then, of course, as Libby mentioned several times today, is our next webinar is going to be with Cynthia Martinez from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we'll all line up and have a lot of questions for her, I'm sure. But the thing to remember about the next webinar is that Cynthia cannot meet us on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. She will meet us on the 4th Wednesday of the month, which is April 24th. So mark that in your calendars. And then in May, on the 15th, we have Brianna Amingwa, who is part of the Fish and Wildlife Youth Programs. And we thought since May is sort of the beginning of the end of the school year, that we should maybe have a presentation and talk a little bit about youth programs and how friends can learn and what kind of programs are friends working on in youth programs, kind of engaging the youth. And Brianna is really excited about bringing us that information on May 15th. In June, since it'll be in the summer, we're going to be looking at a presentation about citizen science and volunteer science programs, just to kind of get people thinking outdoors and kind of how these citizen science projects work and how friends are helping those citizen science projects. That'll be June. We don't have a date for that yet. And then finally in July, on July 10th, which is the second Wednesday of the month, we'll be having a discussion with Willem Stoller of Tualatin. And he's going to be talking to us about internal controls and board governance. So we'll be talking about responsibilities of boards and the governance of boards. And so it will go back to the board discussions. So we have quite a lineup ahead of us. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Great connections, great conversation, and we will be sending out, like Libby said, the information on the recording of the webinar, the chat log, and any reference materials that we Eden will find for us, and she'll be including that in the email return follow-up. So thanks everybody for coming today. We really, really enjoyed your interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.